And one of the key points that she highlighted here is the different categories within ESG or impact investing, because I think it all gets bracketed or bucketed into just one sustainable finance spectrum, or just ESG investing. And there, as Leslie correctly pointed out, there are so many different elements to that, where you start at the grant philanthropic end of the spectrum, which is very much just dominated by social or environmental return, and there's no commercial element to it at all. You have at the other end, just traditional finance, which does not take into account any ESG or impact metrics with regards to its investment process. And then you have that massive bucket in between, that sustainable finance, which has seen a lot of emergence and growth. I mean, the last few years. I mean, this is not new. This has been around for a while. Negative screening has been around for a while. Avoidance of certain industries, such as defense or weaponry or armory or tobacco. This is something that has, I think, just been brought to the forefront in the last maybe 5-10 years, especially actually during COVID, where we saw there was a lot of inequality with regards to access to healthcare, with access to education when schools shut down. So that actually has exacerbated the need for impact, or the need for finance to actually step in where potentially philanthropy or development work hasn't been able to fill that gap. And that impact investing, where my firm actually sits, is very much where you have that intentionality. So you're actually putting money into projects or enterprises where you are seeking to create that change. So it's a little bit different to ESG, whereas focus on internal risk mitigation, and that's very much focused on the financial materiality of a business. So it's another, in addition to credit risk or equity risk, it's just another risk factor that you focus on. But where you have impact, which is a lot more targeted with regards to what is the change you can create with your financing. And I think it's quite important to understand the differentiation between the different categories, even within sustainable finance, because I think once they all get bucketed into the same bracket, I think there's confusion again when it comes to standards and taxonomies and regulators with regards to what applies to which segment of the market. And then the kind of one other element that I think is quite important to introduce, and Leslie mentioned the SDGs, which were introduced back in 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which have these key targets for 2030. And when they were first introduced, there was a $2.5 trillion gap, to meet these 17 SDG goals. So that's increased to 3.7 trillion, like in the space of 7 years. Or if we continue at the rate that we're at, we're going to hit them in 2080. So we are, far behind with regards to, being able to fill these gaps. And I think an interesting, stat to take away is that given that, the stable finance market has, blossomed in the last few years. I think the last count, there was $30 trillion were classified as sustainable finance. We have to be really cognizant that, of course, if this was classified as sustainable finance, we wouldn't have this financing gap, because it would actually be it would be creating that change. It would be actually dealing with inequality. It would be dealing with climate innovation. It would be dealing with no poverty and zero hunger. But, a lot of these assets that are have the terminology of sustainable finance, or maybe just ESG, which is just more focused on risk, are not often contributing to that change, that is required by the SDGs. So I think that's something that's very important to highlight, where, to Leslie's point, you really need to understand what the enterprise is doing, what is the impact that they're trying to create on the ground, what is their actual mission and their objective. And that's what potentially will also just attract those impact investors as well, because they will see value alignment and they will see how they will actually contribute, to these SDG goals.